Hi! In this video, I want to talk about 12 things that I love living in England. I'd like to stress that I'm only going to be talking about England, not the UK, because there are 4 countries in the UK and each of them have their governments, rules, culture and food. And I've really ever lived in England so far. So please bear in mind that the contents in this video is my personal opinions solely based on my personal experiences. Number 1, architecture. If you ever visited England before, you probably noticed that there are historical buildings everywhere, such as medieval castles, medieval churches, Tudor buildings, Victorian Georgian houses, and of course, modern architecture. And they are often standing next to each other, blended into our everyday lives as a cafe or restaurants or public buildings. And I just love it. How they do is that they often preserve the exterior as it was back in the days, but completely refurbish the inside to fit the modern settings. And I just adore the culture of reusing the old but beautiful things. And this is another point that I will make later in the video. And it's not only the large-scale buildings that this applies to, but also the small, ordinary buildings. Like, we bought a house back in 2017, and I was astounded to learn that the house was built in 1895. That's Victorian age. 日本だと明治時代に作られた家を買ったの。And it's just so fascinating to think that we live in the very house that Victorian people had their Victorian lives. It's amazing. Number 2, the countryside. If you visit the UK but never make a trip to the countryside, you would seriously be missing out. It's often easily accessible from the major cities, yet it feels like you stepped into a place where time seems to have stopped in its tracks. Needless to mention the beauty of the nature, like the green patchwork hills or the fresh air or strikingly bright night stars. But what I love the most is the community they have. People just seem to love living there in those cute little villages with the house that they take great care of. Probably because they are like centuries old, and little pubs always dressed up with a huge basket of flowers in spring, and maybe some horses or sheep poking their heads up as if to say hello from the neighboring farms. They have such a great vibe, relaxing but still like energize you and puts you in a good mood instantly by just walking around. And I can't forget to mention the walking trail. You can almost always find a walking trail in the countryside, through the woods or the hills, along the river, or even through a farm. The private landowners allows the public to access and walk through their farm or the land for leisure purposes when you can see this sign. It's awesome. Number 3, the love for vintage/secondhand. The only childhood memories that I have about going to any sort of secondhand stores in Japan is a bookstore near my then grandparents' house. I remember buying a whole series of a comic and read them all while I stay with my grandpa and grandma during the summer holiday. And maybe I remember a couple of flea markets that I did with my mom. But now in Japan, I believe the second-hand market is much larger and common than before. Yet I've been blown away by people's love for it here in England. First of all, there are so many means to go about. Good old antique market or vintage shops or car boot sale. There is one every Sunday morning in my town. Or nowadays, online resale is super popular. Like Facebook Market is huge here, and I also use it too. And among all the services that they can provide, what I specifically want to point out is that people don't seem to mind to reuse the packaging. They don't mind to reuse the packaging that they receive their purchased goods in, to send the product they just sold. It might not make sense to some of you, but I found it ingenious. It means less rubbish going to the landfill and not wasting the resources. In Japan, it doesn't go quite like this, I think, as people may fear that reusing a packaging can be taken as rude or paying not enough respect to the paying buyers. I'm not saying this is bad. I think it's just our culture. Me personally, I don't mind it even if my package arrives in a battered plastic bag, as long as there's no damage inside. And the people here seem to think the same. And the last one and my favorite is charity shops. I think they call it thrift stores in the US and Canada, and op shops in Australia and New Zealand. It's the perfect place to find unique and affordable items, as well as a great place to bring your donations to declutter your house. Unlike Japanese second-hand shops, you don't need to prove your identity to donate things. You can simply put the things in a bag and go into your shop and hand the bag to the shop staff. And it's a good feeling that you can get rid of the things that you don't need anymore. Perfectly reusable, but they go to the charity and contribute to a good cause. I'm not sure about other English-speaking countries that I mentioned before, but in England, charity shops as much a part of any high street in England as a post office or a convenience store in Japan. Choosing to shop secondhand is definitely something of a lifestyle, and eco-friendliness of it goes without saying. But if I start talking about it, that's going to be a whole another video.